When Donald Trump demanded $2.8 trillion from Canada last week, it seemed like just another outrageous headline, another bold economic claim in a world full of them. But what most Americans don't realize is that this wasn't just a demand. It was a wake-up call, a shocking revelation that exposed something much deeper. Trump wasn't just making a political statement. He was, in his own way, laying bare the collapse of American economic diplomacy. And what happened next was even more eye-opening. Mark Carney's three-word response went viral, sweeping across social media with over 50 million views. Why? Because Carney's reply wasn't just a clever retort. It was a crystallization of something serious people on both sides of the border have been quietly thinking for months, but haven't dared to voice publicly. This moment wasn't just about trade policy, it was about power and how it's shifting in the 21st century. Keep watching, because when you understand the full picture of what Carney said, it'll completely change how you view America's place in the world and why its global influence is slipping away. The official story sounds simple enough. Trump, speaking at a private fundraiser in Mar-a-Lago, claimed that decades of trade imbalances and what he called sweetheart deals had cost America $2.8 trillion in lost wealth. He demanded immediate compensation from Canada, threatening severe economic consequences if Ottawa refused to comply. It sounded like a show of strength and America finally standing up for itself after years of being taken advantage of. But here's where it gets interesting. That logic only works if the assumptions behind it are right. And this time, they weren't. Trump's argument, built on the premise that Canada needs American markets more than America needs Canadian resources, missed the most critical point. And that point has nothing to do with the money at all. You see, Carney didn't get defensive. He didn't engage in a long-winded rebuttal. He simply looked into the camera and said, "Show your work." Three words that seemed simple, yet they completely destroyed Trump's position. Notice what's missing here. Carney didn't deny the demand outright. He didn't attack the logic of American strength. He didn't even argue with the number. He just asked for proof. And that's where the entire American argument crumbled. Now, think about this. When Carney responded with those three words, he wasn't just challenging Trump. He was exposing the core flaw in American economic diplomacy. Because when you demand $2.8 trillion from a trading partner, you're not just making a political statement. You're making a mathematical one. And here's the problem. In the world of trade, mathematics requires proof. Trump didn't provide it. The response from Washington was a series of evasions, not evidence. The Treasury Department cited ongoing review, the Commerce Department pointed to classified methodologies, and the U.S. Trade Representative's office claimed the calculations were proprietary. In other words, there was no proof, no analysis, no documentation. The $2.8 trillion wasn't the result of deep economic research. It was political theater designed to sound strong without being grounded in facts. And that's where this moment turns from embarrassing to dangerous. Because when you try to manipulate sophisticated global partners with nothing but bravado, it backfires. Carney knew that, and that's why he said what he did. The American response wasn't just a failure of diplomacy. It was a failure of understanding how the global system actually works. Here's where the situation starts to heat up. You see, Carney didn't just respond with three words and walk away. His reply set off a chain reaction that revealed the depth of the problem. It's not just about this one demand. It's about a systemic failure that's been brewing for years. When Carney called for evidence, the world didn't just see a failed negotiation. They saw the unraveling of American credibility. This isn't the first time we've seen something like this. Historically, the United States held the kind of economic clout that made everyone else sit up and listen. In the past, America could make a demand like this and expect partners to at least consider it because they knew there was evidence, there was strength, and there was consistency behind it. Now, American diplomats are increasingly relying on assertion, not analysis. Pressure, not persuasion. Threats, not evidence. And that shift, it's not just a diplomatic misstep, it's a dangerous normalization of incompetence. The $2.8 trillion demand wasn't a fluke. It's part of a much larger pattern of political bluster overtaking serious economic discourse. But it gets worse. The real damage wasn't just in how America was exposed, it was in what came next. After Carney's response, the cracks started to show in the entire American approach. The real evidence of how deeply the problem runs came from what didn't happen. Washington couldn't back up the $2.8 trillion claim with a single shred of evidence. And that wasn't just a failure of the Trump administration. It's a failure that reveals the entire system is broken. In the days following the exchange, the world started to notice something troubling. Countries that had once bowed to American pressure began openly questioning the credibility of U.S. positions. Editorial boards in London, Frankfurt, Tokyo, even in Mexico City, ran stories asking the same thing. If the U.S. couldn't prove a basic economic claim against its closest trading partner, what did that say about the rest of its policies? This wasn't just about trade with Canada anymore. This was a crisis of trust. And that's a problem that goes far beyond one negotiation. The fallout didn't stop with editorials or political commentary. It quickly escalated into a series of rapid developments. Allies, partners, even neutral countries started reacting in real time. Behind closed doors, European officials were describing American trade positions as post-empirical. They weren't just skeptical anymore. They were demanding independent verification of U.S. economic data before any negotiations could proceed. But it didn't stop there. Even countries like Mexico, which have long been vulnerable to American pressure, began to shift their stance. They started requesting third-party arbitration in trade disputes, something unheard of just a few years ago. The question is, what happens if this continues? If the U.S. can't even back up its most basic claims, what does that mean for global trade? What happens when everyone starts planning around American policies instead of with them? And here's the most important part. This isn't just about politicians or headlines. This is about you. This is about how these failures start to affect everyday people, whether you realize it or not. Because when international trust in American economic leadership begins to crumble, the effects aren't just felt in boardrooms or government offices. You might not see it in the news, but it's happening. Canadian pension funds, for example, have quietly started to reduce their exposure to U.S. assets over the past 18 months. European manufacturers are sourcing more critical components from places outside the United States, not because American goods are bad, but because the risks of doing business with an unpredictable partner are just too high. And it doesn't end there. Asian investors, especially in infrastructure and clean energy, are pulling back from U.S.-linked projects and focusing on investments that don't require American regulatory approval or political stability. If this feels familiar, say so in the comments. This is the kind of shift that quietly happens when people lose trust in your leadership, and it's happening right now. Now let's step back from the outrage for a moment. This isn't just about poor decisions or individual incompetence. It's about something much deeper, the system itself. What's happening here isn't just a political misstep. It's a systemic breakdown. The problem is not that American economic leaders are making bad calls. It's that they're increasingly unable to understand or engage with the very systems they're trying to control. In other words, the machinery of American diplomacy and economic policy has become hollow. And when that happens, countries begin to notice. You see, Carney's response wasn't just about calling out a flawed number. It was a challenge to the entire framework of American power. The true lesson here is how this moment reveals the growing disconnect between political leadership and real economic analysis. Carney represented the opposite approach. He demonstrated what it looks like when institutions, not personalities, drive policy. And here's the unsettling truth. As America loses its grip on its own institutional strength, countries like Canada, with smaller economies but serious institutional depth, can step in and call the bluff. Now let's talk about what happens next. The path forward here isn't straightforward. There are two potential futures emerging from this moment. On one hand, America could double down on its current trajectory, continuing to make demands without the necessary backing, hoping that the sheer size of its economy will keep the world in line. But as we've seen, that approach is already losing traction. The global community is no longer intimidated by sheer force. Without credibility, America's leverage is slipping fast. On the other hand, there's a more difficult but potentially more powerful option, a return to competence. Rebuilding trust won't happen overnight, but if America begins to prioritize institutional capacity over political posturing, it could regain its place as a reliable, credible global leader. This would require years of painstaking work, but it's the only way to rebuild the trust that's eroding so quickly. The real question is, which path will America choose? And more importantly, will the global community wait for the U.S. to make up its mind? The truth is, this moment between Trump and Carney isn't just about a failed negotiation or a viral response. It's a glimpse into something much larger. the slow, quiet erosion of American leadership on the global stage, Mark Carney's 3 words weren't just a clever remark. They were a challenge, a direct question to the United States. Do you still have the credibility to lead? And the answer to that question, unfortunately, was clear: not yet. This wasn't just about trade policy. This was about the presumption of competence, the trust that's required for diplomacy to work. When that trust is gone, so too is the ability to lead. It's not that America can't recover, but it will take time. Rebuilding institutional capacity, restoring analytical standards, and earning back the world's trust will be a long and difficult process. But the question remains, will American political culture find the patience and humility needed to do this work? Or will the cycle of bluster and insecurity continue? The world is watching, and it's only a matter of time before the next move is made. If you want to stay updated on how this plays out, make sure to subscribe for more analysis, because the stakes have never been higher.